In many cultures, the tradition is at the end of a graduation or the end of something where, armies as well do it. You usually have a little ceremony where you break down the barriers, students and the masters. Everyone goes on the same level. So I said to Dr. Atif, I said, well, you know what, I think I'm just going to sit there and tell some jokes, because whatever I'm going to say, it's not going to be on the same level. I might as well just do a kind of comic stand-up routine. And when I said that, the looks, he's a very kind man. He won't say no. But the look in his eyes brought to mind the famous lines of the 17th century Hindi poet of the Mughal court, Bihari Lal. And this is where the comic stand-up routine begins, because I don't know any Hindi, so bear with me. Sasaya ke dohre yun navik ke tir, dekhan menchote lage gaf kare gambir. The couplets of Satsaya are like the arrows of a hunter. They look small but cut deep. So I reevaluated my situation. So, alhamdulillah, this is probably where the stand-up comedy ends. And I thought, actually, and Sophia's pointed this out as well, that many of you are parents who've let their children come here for a year. And alhamdulillah, I was blessed to become a father about a year ago, a bit more than a year ago. And over time, especially since I started sending my son to nursery, I really start to see some changes to myself as a person. I used to think of myself as a very relaxed person, fairly modern, accepting of engaging with the outside world. But the moment I have to send my son every day to a nursery at a church, I start to think to myself, oh my God, these people, they don't speak the same language I grew up with, they don't have the same religion, the same culture. My son spends about 10 days with them, 10 hours sometimes a day. Is he going to turn out to be a different person? How is this going to influence them? So I fully understand that this is a drop in the ocean of what you felt like when you left your kids, come here for a year, left them in the hands of people you don't really know, even if they are Muslims. And I have to say, going back to my son, what I realized is that not only that it was good for him, because he gets to start his life meeting different kinds of people, familiarizing himself with different environments, and he's also blessing himself there. His presence there brings something to these people that they wouldn't have otherwise. I believe he's the only kid of Muslim background in that nursery. I think there's something to be said about that. So when we go back to reflecting what the CMC is for students who finished their studies at Darul Uloom, effectively have already graduated, have already been grounded in tradition. The question we want to ask ourselves is, why do they need this? Isn't the madrasa education sufficient? So on top of my little insight as a parent, I'd like to add my insights as a historian as well. And my apologies, of course, many of you probably didn't come here to think to experience a history lecture, so I'll keep it brief, hopefully. The Islamic historian George Makdisi is famous for comparing the traditional Islamic madrasa system to the universities as they develop in the Christian West. Some scholars have said that he perhaps overplayed the similarities. I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that, the idea of certification, the relationship between students and masters, and even in the very fact that the buildings, the colleges here, places like Cambridge, have some similarities with the traditional madrasas in places like Al-Azhar, do show that there are common points here. Whether or not there is direct influence or just certain recurring factors that occur in all human civilizations that reach a certain level. He also famously compared the traditional Islamic education to the guild, the traditional craft guilds of medieval Europe. And if we think about traditional craft guilds, right, people used to belong to an institution. So if you were a blacksmith, you usually have 3 stages in your life. You start off as an apprentice, where you'd study under a master blacksmith, and you'd acquire all the skills, tools, know-how. And then you reach a second level, the journeyman level, where you're considered to have mastered the skills, but you need to go out in the world and establish yourself as a master. And I think there's a practical aspect to it as well, because you can't just learn something from a person in a very close environment. You need to go out there and test your skills in the world outside. And finally, of course, the third stage is the level of the master himself. That's when you are able to bring back your experience as well as your expertise in this particular trade or craft and start training apprentices of your own. So going back to the madrasa, the question to ask is, we have, alhamdulillah, after spending a year with these students, I realized the madrasa system is effective, it's doing its job well. The kind of manners, the good character, also very balanced-minded students, they interact with people. The number of people that I've spoken to have come and visited the college and said good things about the students, have been very impressed by the akhlaq. I don't think there is an issue here with the way the madrasa is forming these students into the kind of individuals that they're supposed to be formed into, leaders of the Muslim community. What's missing here is that in the past, the madrasa used to be an organic part of the Muslim society. So whatever you learned in a fiqh textbook or a kalam book or whatever, it fitted with the concerns and needs of society outside. When you walk outside the madrasa door, it's the same world. That's no longer the case. The world is changing, has changed, continues to change. And I think what the CMC allows us is a kind of liminal space, a kind of barzakh, if you like, in between that apprentice level. So if you consider the madrasa as kind of fulfilling that level 1, apprentice, getting all the skills and training, forming an alim or a Muslim community leader, what the CMC does is it begins initiating students into the journeyman phase, the phase in which they take their skills and learn about how to apply them into the world outside. And of course, in the past, you didn't need this because, well, they lived in that world. The madrasa was the world outside. Of course, there are many different ways in which we can respond to the changes that go on around us. One, for example, is just closing off the madrasa, turning it into a very isolated unit which doesn't interact with the world outside. I mean, that can work to some degree, and it has in many cases. The second way is perhaps by radically transforming the madrasa itself, but the problem is, where do you draw the line without compromising the tradition? How far can you go without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Take a very crude analogy in the English language. Another way is by trying to radically transform society itself. Of course, we've seen what happens when you try to do that, especially when it leads to sort of a violent program of social transformation. So what the CMC offers effectively is a fourth way, retaining the tradition of the madrasa, retaining the apprentice level where ulama are trained as alims, and then giving them the kind of space where they can start to learn to interact with the outside world. Of course, many of them would return back into the madrasa system and inshallah provide many benefits as masters themselves. So, what's my role in this college? I'm not a sheikh. I have a doctorate, but actually, if I was a Hanafi, I'd probably be following these guys. In many ways, I have found that my role here is as an accompanying fellow. And in fact, that's the title, but I'm a research fellow. And my real job is supposed to publish and do research and interact with modern academia. I also felt that this is actually, in many ways, the first year of my journeyman phase. I've spent years studying at universities, acquiring the research skills and methods of a historian. But it's one thing to be able to do that. I mean, I could have stayed in a university, I suppose. But in what way could someone like me perhaps in any way contribute or provide some kind of service to the community? And I felt that this is it. This was my first year in the journeyman phase. I could speak and interact with people who actually are living and breathing the tradition. It's not just something in a history textbook. So, going back to the way I felt about my son, I think we have to see the CMC not only as a place where the students themselves can benefit, but where people like myself can benefit as well from being able to be in contact with the living tradition. In fact, in many ways, I see myself as a student, not as their master. They've been very kind to call me Dr. Harith all year long, but I probably should have been calling them Sheikh Muhammad and Sheikh Abu Tahir. And of course, towards the end of the year, they gave me a black turban to wear, and they bravely tried to wear it outside one night. It was very hot. And, The point is, I think that the CMC isn't just a place where imams are taken and updated. It's also a place where the modern world can learn to benefit from traditional scholarship. And further, to benefit Muslim society, but also humanity itself. We're living in an age where we start to see monsters. There are monsters everywhere. From our own community, a reflection of our own lack of ability to connect to tradition, but also to connect to the world around us. What I see in these students are not only fellows on a trip, but also heroes. And perhaps to root this long rant of mine into tradition, I believe if you go back to the medieval scholars, they saw this change coming, in which Muslims are not meant to just benefit their own community, but to benefit mankind as a whole. In fact, we should see the transformations going on around us as a great opportunity, as a benefit, as a blessing. Imam Nawawi famously commented on the famous hadith of loving your brother, of faith being intrinsically linked to loving what is good for yourself to happen to your brother as well. And he translated this as humanity, not just Muslims. Secondly, the famous Persian poet, Sa'di, has a couple of lines. Well, it's a bit longer, but I'll read only two of them. Bani Adam yek azaya yek digarand, kedar afarinesh zayek goharand. Bani Adam, and this, he was inspired by the hadith in which believers are one community. If they feel pain in one part of the body, the others feel it as well. Sa'di extended this to the whole of humanity. I believe this is a situation, we see a lot of fitna, a lot of confusion about what's going on, but I think this is actually a blessing in disguise. And the CMC, alhamdulillah, inshallah, will provide the opportunities that are needed for the madrasa to once again become an organic, effective part of society outside, beyond just the Muslim ummah itself. So, to the parents in the audience, I said the students are heroes, but you are the true heroes for letting your children go off for 1 year. Because in my perspective right now, I can't even let my son for a few hours in a day, so I can't imagine how it is like to put your children in the hands of strangers. So I commend you for doing a truly brave and honorable thing. To the students, I want to thank you for allowing me the honor of joining you in this journey, the first phase of both our journeyman of our journeys out into the outside world beyond academia. As inheritors of the Prophet, you are the nobility, you are the aristocracy of this ummah, and it's been my honor to serve you. I trust that wherever you go, you will thrive and bring goodness, as long as you continue to stay true to those noble values of honor, humility, love, compassion, and understanding. As the lines from the famous Jahili Israelite poet Samuel, إِذَا الْمَرْءُ لَمْ يَدْنَسْ مِنَ اللُّؤْمِ عِرْضُ فَكُلُّ رِدَاءٍ يَرْتَدِي جَمِيلٌ. Right? As long as a man's honor, a man's valor is unblemished, any cloak he wears is beautiful. So wherever you go, whether you're going to be wearing the turban, the imama of a sheikh, or perhaps the gowns of a don, or perhaps just as a community leader, as a chaplain, or even as a family man, I'm sure that you stay true to these noble values and devotion for the good of humanity. Inshallah, you'll do great. Honestly, spending a year with you has given me a lot more hope than I had before. I have a few regrets from this year. One, we never got to a second round of debate that Mansour started. That's partly my fault. I was very busy. And alhamdulillah, inshallah, maybe we can have a second round reunion. The second one was we also never really resolved that dessert competition between Abu Tahir and Dr. Atif. I think everyone was too afraid to express their opinions. But I'm sorry, Dr. Atif. I think Abu Tahir's dessert is better. And lastly, my regret is I didn't get to know all of you a bit more. I was very busy, and I did have the opportunity to talk to you, particularly the sisters. I didn't think it was my own reservations. I wasn't very sure how to communicate. But what I heard secondhand, mashallah, again, I gained a lot of hope this year. And especially as a young father, this was very important for me. And I hope that the next batch will be as good, but we all know, no two things are quite the same. So please forgive me for anything if I've crossed any boundaries or I haven't neglected any of my responsibilities. I know I can be a bit whimsical, mischievous sometimes, but I hope it's been for the benefit of the college. My apologies also to the members of staff, Atif, for making fun of you in this speech. I hope I get to keep that job. And please don't forget me in your dua. وبالله التوفيق والسلام. السلام عليكم.